one of the prime sponsors, supporters, instigators of the CV show is, of course, the trade body, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. So I'm delighted to be joined by Sukky Choongh from the SMMT, Environmental Policy Manager, so a pretty big remit across the whole of the motor industry and things. But Sukky, first question, I guess, is, it is quite hard, this whole decarbonisation route and this whole journey that we're on. Where's the SMMT at? Where are you? What are you pushing forward for? What's the agenda for the trade body?
Well, thank you, Andy, and thank you to GreenFleet for inviting me on to speak today. I think the agenda for the SMMT is quite clear. We've got direction from government to decarbonise road transport by 2050. So our role is to convene manufacturers and others together and speak to government so that we can have a policy that works for everybody and is achievable. So I think that's where the strength of our body comes in, where we can gather information from our members, feed that back to government, and as I say, have a collaborative policy that we can achieve.
Absolutely, and I think we heard earlier from Bob Moran that the government is, obviously there's a clear decarbonisation agenda, but this government in particular, and actually the previous administration, the growth agenda for UK PLC is arguably right up there with decarb in terms of our journey that we're on, and I'm guessing that's a really prime focus for you as a trade body as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubting that environmental improvements and achieving net zero road transport is going to come at a cost. Should not come at a cost where we can't function, where operators can't function and go out of business, where OEMs can't do business in the UK. So I think that's been particularly challenging for us over the last few years, not just with COVID, net zero being expensive anyway, and now tariffs looming. So it's this forever changing world that we've got to do business in, but ultimately we do have to achieve it, but not at the cost of the people that work in our sector.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. This journey, if I can use that analogy, it's been a pretty bumpy road over the last 5 years, without a doubt. And I think we're now emerging actually in pretty good shape here in the UK. In terms of the commercial vehicle sector, both vans and trucks and things, how do you feel that we're doing? Is it moving in the direction that the trade body sees as?
It's moving, and I don't mean to be critical or quite harsh, but it's just not good enough. It is not fast enough. We've got end of sale dates in 10 years for all vans, and 73% of the market for HGVs. So, we've got the zero emission vehicle mandate, or the VETS regulation that's come in for vans. We finished last year at about 6.8%, not the 10% that was targeted. We're on track to perhaps get a little bit further and meet 25% by 2030, by the end of 2027. But HGVs, there are less than 600 zero-emission HGVs on the road at the minute. 38% of those are bin lorries. So we've got 30-odd vehicles that are available to buy on the market. That is a third of all HGVs that are available on the market at all. They're electric, so OEMs have done fantastic things in making vehicles, not just trucks that deliver things, but trucks that do things. You can see the AA's breakdown truck over in Hall 4. We've got cement mixers and tippers, so all of that is happening. There are 4 locations in the UK where you can publicly charge your HGV. If you want to get a grid connection, the connection for grids is about 15 years. If you're in the queue and you've got all your ducks lined up and you've done your paperwork, it's still about a 3 or 4 year wait time to get that connection. So we've asked today for transport depots to be prioritised in the government's plan. If road transport is the biggest CO2 emitter in the UK, why are we making it so difficult to decarbonise? Open the doors, let's just get the tech out there. I think the planning system also, when it comes to local planning policy, depends on which local authority you're dealing with as to what type of service you've got. So we would like to see nationally consistent, simplified planning and a fast-track approach so that we can get depots decarbonised as soon as possible.
Yeah, so not only has it been a bumpy journey for the last 5 years, you foresee it being a pretty bumpy journey for the next 5 and beyond in terms of taking us out to that. I mean, the 2050 objective, net zero in transport. Everybody is aligned around that legal objective, and as you say, it's strategically for you, your members, that's all there. But actually, the pace that we get there, there's still a bit of discussion to be had.
You can't just put this ambition out there and expect it's just going to happen. You know, things need to happen before we can achieve that. And at the moment, you know, we have a system, we have an electricity system that's not geared up or designed for transport, and we're trying to shoehorn vehicles into that. And actually, I think that we need to change things a little bit and change the process. It's not impossible. It's just people have to make decisions.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the recent announcements about the change in the way that Ofgem and grid connection priorities are going to be made. So hopefully that will start to unlock some of the challenges that you're flagging here.
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful. Data centres and energy projects have been prioritised, but road transport hasn't. So if you think about the 70-odd thousand depots that we've got across the country for haulage, and then haven't even started to talk about bus garages as well. So if we think about the infrastructure that's needed and the power that will be required by 2050, it's quite hefty. So let's get on with it now. I think we should have started this about 20 years ago, but here we are. Let's move forward.
Yeah, it's the old classic of directions. I won't say whose, but you know, if you want to get there, I wouldn't start from here, sort of thing. It's that sort of question, isn't it? But so. We've mentioned about electric vehicles and the net zero agenda, and obviously electric and fuel cell hydrogen, zero at the tailpipe as defined, and without getting into the debate about other technologies. But that's going to be a long game, it's a long journey. What are some of the other decarbonisation measures that we can see, or maybe help some of the other operators look at? Are there any other things in the strategic sort of decarbonisation pathway?
I think in the first and foremost issue is about unlocking the ability for operators to be able to take on one of these vehicles in the first place. So the TCO, the finance arrangement, has got to be profitable. You know, we're not talking about vehicles that people buy because there's a new model or they like the look of it. These are assets, they're working vehicles. So the total cost of ownership has to work. They've got to be able to carry enough goods to make their service profitable. At the moment, we have a situation in the UK where regulation on weights and dimensions actually penalises people. They don't get to carry the additional weight on an electric vehicle compared to a diesel vehicle. So if you can't carry that much stuff, we're then at risk of, we might need two vehicles to carry the items that we're doing there. And having more vehicles on the road, whilst it sounds strange for me as the industry body to say this, isn't actually what we want. Not for the same person, not because we can't carry enough. But I think immediate things are, as I say, the finance bit, unlocking those grid connections, completely recognise that there isn't a zero emission option for every single use case in the UK, for every single operation, but there is for about 60 or 70% of them. So let's do that first whilst we're working on the other things.
I think that's really interesting that, we can see that much of the market already, if I can call it electrifiable, in terms of its operation, if we can unlock all of those other key elements that are necessary. Arguably the truck, and I was talking to Voltempo earlier, arguably in some cases the truck is almost the easy bit that we kind of know how to do. It's all of the ancillary financing, infrastructure, weights and dimensions, policy regulations that need to be put in place to suddenly make that truck the no-brainer that in some cases it arguably is already.
Absolutely, and I go back to my earlier point of you set an ambition, you can't expect it just to happen, because actually here's all of this mess that we have to wade through to be able to get there.
Yeah. Before we bring in Phil Moon from DAF as one of the main representatives of the UK automotive sector, I do want to touch on a little bit of your background. As an expert in air quality, and with your background, I know you were air quality sort of within London boroughs, and actually freight consolidation manager for a project as well, which I hadn't realised. So clearly an expert across this whole space. We're talking about decarbonisation. That is, I would say, the buzzword of the show, but we haven't fixed the air quality problem yet, and that is still a real focus. I know for you personally it has been, and really for this whole technology and a whole agenda. Is there anything more we need to do about that? Is there anything, anything in that space?
So to give some context, I am actually an environmental health practitioner, so I'm trained in food hygiene and housing and all those kind of things, but I always was drawn to environmental protection, so noise, contaminated land and air quality. And I've been an air quality officer in the London Borough of Islington, Wandsworth, Lambeth, Greenwich. It's been a massive challenge, and actually in the 20 years that I've been working in this field, I've seen huge improvements. There are things that changed overnight. You can look at buses as an example. You change the bus fleet in most of London, and then all of a sudden your NOx concentrations go from 124 micrograms, as they were on Putney High Street, down to 76, and now they've actually gone down below the objective limit, which is 40 micrograms per cubic metre. That's kind of the reason I have chosen to be in the environment, because it's the health of people is why we do this. This isn't about something different or just trying to get people into electric vehicles. The reason for decarbonisation and air quality improvement is because of the people. We can do things immediately just by changing the way we operate. So those small changes about electrifying the fleet that you can. If Euro 6 diesel is the best thing you can do, then do it, because the NOx emissions from Euro 6 diesel are way better than anything else that we've had before. We've seen that evidence within the London low emission zone and the ultra low emission zone as well, with all those improvements. So I don't think we should make operators feel guilty that they can't electrify today. We should help them to electrify today. But if your absolute last resort is Euro 6 diesel, that's okay. But making those last minute journeys where people are exposed more to air quality pollutants, if we can change those within our towns and cities, then we're on our way to having cleaner air and affecting people's health directly.
Yeah, so decarbonisation is obviously the big game in town, but it comes hand in hand with air quality improvement, and indeed it has to fit with financial sustainability as well, of course. So at this point, I'd like to bring in Phil Moon from DAF Trucks. Phil, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us here. So, DAF, the main truck OEM in the UK today, I think, in terms of production, and where are you at in terms of your journey? We've spoken about electrification, but I'm guessing you're building trucks with all sorts of decarbonisation options on them. So where's the next step, and where's DAF taking this agenda?
Yeah, it's a good question, Andy. Yeah, you're absolutely right. DAF is the biggest supplier into the UK market. We have been this year. We celebrate 30 years of market leadership, no mean feat. And we build the majority of our trucks for the UK. In the UK, we've got our Leyland truck production facility. We've been obviously. Our customers share the same objective ultimately, which is to cut their reliance on fossil fuels. They call it fuel efficiency, but it's also, of course, helps in terms of decarbonisation. And whilst we're on a very strong trajectory towards zero emissions, we continue, of course, to make our existing diesel fleet the most fuel efficient it can possibly be. And that's today, with a very small percentage of vehicles being zero emission, as Sukky's already talked about. That's the biggest sort of impact we can immediately have in terms of reducing emissions of carbon dioxide. We're also, of course, making our vehicles more capable of running on renewables. So that's another perspective in terms of well-to-wheel decarbonisation. We've got our entire range of vehicles can run on HVO, hydrotreated vegetable oil, but also we just announced our ability to run on FAME as well, up to 100% on certain engine models, which all plays a very important part. But wherever possible, we want to move to that zero tailpipe emission sort of ideal. We've been producing electric vehicles for trucks since 2018, in fact, but it's been a very slow journey. We're just sort of rolling out our latest generation, our latest iteration of that. So we've got an electric XB range of products from 12 to 19 tons. We've got XDs, which are available in a range of configurations, and also XF. We've got one in Hall 4 here today. And really, quite importantly, a lot of those XDs and XFs are going to be deployed in the ZHID program. That's quite an exciting initiative, and I think that's going to be quite an important sort of milestone, if you like, in terms of we're going to see hundreds of vehicles being deployed from a range of manufacturers into long distance operations, arguably some of the first long distance zero emission journeys over the coming months, and that's going to be quite an important sort of objective. But ultimately, we need to go to decarbonisation. We've got 2035 as the objective. That's the end of sale date today for vehicles up to 26 tonnes with non-zero emission drivelines, and the remaining vehicles, that'll be 2040. That's not very far away. And that's a big challenge.
Indeed, in terms of certainly in terms of generation of product and product cycles, and for operators, of course, in terms of their thinking, you're absolutely right. These dates, and I guess if I come back to my analogy of the journey, it sounds like DAF are actually probably further along that journey than many OEMs, because you were leaders in the BET trial, the battery electric truck trial. I think you had your products, battery electric products, one of the first ones out there in real operation with NHS fleets, I think it was.
Yeah, there was a range of different public bodies. So we had 20 vehicles. They were in operation ultimately for about 18 months, and actually many of the operators continue to run them today. And that was really important, and that's where government funding really helped to really demonstrate how vehicles can go into operation, because we're all a little bit sceptical, aren't we? We've been very comforted by internal combustion engines being able to refuel wherever you want. Of course, electric vehicles bring in a whole different set of challenges, but it can be done, and where they're deployed correctly and where electric is available at a reasonable price, there's a real total cost of ownership benefit for operators, and that's the important message that we're trying to get across to operators at the moment. And I think anybody who's sort of thinking about how they can make their business zero emission, and they need to come and talk to all manufacturers, because we've got some very clever modelling software which will hopefully be able to demonstrate how you can get to a place where it actually pays to go zero emission, because we're getting to that point with more and more different operations in road transport.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because in terms of this journey, one of the first tasks for any operator is to understand what they're doing with their vehicles and their fuel at the moment. Yep. Whether diesel's being stolen, or whether their vehicles are being used in the right way and things. So really drilling into your data is almost step one on your journey. And actually there's an awful lot you can do before you buy a new truck or before you change your fuel. And I guess, is that almost a consultancy that you're doing now then as an OEM?
Absolutely. I think manufacturers, OEMs can go so far, but there's also some specialists out there, and we'd encourage people to really do that consultative work, looking with experts at how they run their fleet today, maybe if the operation needs to change, and picking the sort of low-hanging fruit, those particular routes which can be decarbonised or can be made zero emission. Look at those, make sure that you're picking the ones that can transition the easiest, because for sure as products develop, and we've already seen that over the last few years, where the typical range of a vehicle will get longer as battery technology improves, so the opportunity, that those low-hanging fruit will get easier to find. So picking the right ones today are really important, but there are them there, and more operators are finding them. And of course, once they've also invested and they've got over the hurdles of having the back-to-base charging infrastructure, if that's what they need, once that's in place, and that's one thing they don't need to worry about when they buy the additional vehicles to increase their fleet of zero-emission products. So the pain is up front, but once you've sort of invested in that, then you want to really utilise that infrastructure, charging infrastructure, as much as possible, and then you can really, you can return on investment is that much quicker.
So for some of these technologies, that first step is actually the hardest or the biggest, because you've got to think about so many other things.
Yeah.
And I guess I wanted to come back a little bit and sort of pick up on the policy, because as we said in a narrative earlier on, was the things that will drive this market are it being cheaper. There's no doubt if money talks, but also if it's policy, if it's the law, that will force people to think about it.
Yeah.
And right now there's a little bit of a policy vacuum, I would say, in the truck space. We've got some aspirations, but what do we need to put in place? How do we need to kind of get that next step in policy that's really going to start sending the right message?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of policy around manufacturers So Sukky talked about the vets. I think that there's a lot of pressure being brought to bear on manufacturers. There are some welcome opportunities. The plug-in truck grant being reconfirmed for another 12 months is really good news, but it's kind of a small financial incentive when you compare it to the potentially high premium of an electric truck, for instance. We could do with a little bit more of that, and of course various government initiatives like the BET program and the ZHID program are great, but we kind of need the ongoing incentives to encourage operators to make that transition, to make it more practical. I don't want to define what that needs to be, but there are obvious opportunities, whether that might be zero emission zones or some reduction in road fund licence. There could be some operational benefits, because, and Sukky talked about them before, there are some natural disadvantages where maybe you can't carry the same payload, so you need something to balance those operational disadvantages to make it that much more attractive to invest in zero emissions.
If I could add also, the policy bit needs a really big picture. We talk about operations before. With trucks being restricted as they are, especially in London, and I apologise for giving a London-centric view to this, but I see it every day. But in other major cities as well, your truck often goes around only 2/3 full, if it's lucky, because it doesn't have the time to be able to do all of the drops because of the traffic. And you're not in the traffic, you are the traffic. But actually, zero-emission vehicles are quieter. We can't really take advantage of the fact that they are quieter and there's less vibration whilst they're still in the traffic with all of the other noisy vehicles. So why can't we have more out-of-hours deliveries? Why can't we change operations? We did it during the Olympics and it was great and nobody complained. So why can't we allow for zero-emission vehicles to kind of have a different schedule, if you like, and make those quieter deliveries where there's less traffic? They'll be more efficient. The rest of the road will be nicer for everybody else because you don't have a truck next to you as well. When you talk about policy, I think it's important to understand what is that policy trying to achieve, because if you're just trying to set a policy that makes vehicle manufacturers sell more vehicles without putting something similar on to operators and others to buy more vehicles, then we're probably not going to achieve what we want. And then there's that bigger picture of the operator that wants to decarbonise at their depot, but their landlord isn't permitting the grid connection. So I think we have to look beyond just the vehicle. Scope 3 emissions and science-based targets are all going to play a big role. So when everybody else has to reduce their emissions, they're going to go down their supply chain and have a look at the vehicles that they're using and demand that they are zero. But again, we have to unlock those barriers for them so that the whole system works.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, having been woken up by the bin lorries collecting the bins outside my hotel this morning, the only thing I could hear was the diesel engine, not the clanking of bins. So I would absolutely agree. If only there were some of the electric bin lorries that you spoke about. I think absolutely agree with you. I think there's an awful lot we need to. There's a huge toolbox of policy options that maybe we're not playing and picking out and using in the right. VEDs, one that's been successful in the past, and zero emission zones, low emissions. Of course, Birmingham has a Class D CAS clean air zone as well, so probably a lot of the same restrictions. So I'm just conscious of time, and I think again coming back to this analogy about the journey, and so what would your advice be for an operator who's looking at this and saying, well, electric, hydrogen, is there hybrid options, fuel? What would your advice be to them in terms of how to determine what their next step might be?
Look at your operation. Take an honestly look at where you go, how far are you travelling every day, where are your customers, and go out and see the vehicles today. They're on display here at the CV show. I'll be on the main stage at 1:30 with a couple of OEMs talking about what we need to be doing in the next decade. So speak to people today, get advice. There's plenty of experts in the two halls.
Brilliant. Phil, from you as an OEM, what's your advice to an operator coming into this and looking at it, not knowing where to start?
Yeah, well, don't put it off. Start having the conversation now, because it will take longer than you think to sort of put all the pieces together, and you want to talk to multiple suppliers. You might get different opinions, but don't let that be a reason for inaction. I think these processes take time, and you won't want to go from 0 to 100 and straight away. So, make the start now, because it won't be many buying cycles before diesel-powered vehicles won't really necessarily be the option, and actually you don't want, as an operator, to be stuck in that slow lane. You will want to be transitioning, you will want to already have the experience and the knowledge of operating zero-emission technology within your own team, and you need to develop that knowledge yourself. So I think start today. If you haven't already done so, go and talk to your existing but also other manufacturer suppliers, because the marketplace is very dynamic at the moment. There's lots of different solutions out there. There isn't one fits all. And the only thing I would say is, and you mentioned hydrogen, it's another technology that gets touted, but it trails a little bit between electric, and DAF is certainly looking at hydrogen. It's a very interesting fuel. It has some apparent, some benefits maybe, but don't let the possibility of a future hydrogen solution put you off getting involved in electric today, because we see that electric's definitely going to be the forerunner, and it's, don't let hydrogen be the excuse for inactivity.
Great advice, and I think a great point on which to end. Thank you to Sukky, thank you to Phil. I think what I took from this is, don't be frightened of taking that first step, and if you're not sure, don't be frightened of coming and asking the experts how they can help you take that next step. But jam tomorrow isn't always the right thing, so make sure you're working on it and starting today on your journey to decarbonisation. Thank you, Sukky. Thank you, Phil.